The film begins by showing a prison in Bulgaria. Inside that prison, there was a guy named Bohemi who was locked up for a really bad crime because he murdered someone. Bohemi had been in prison for 15 years, so he was used to prison life and felt like it was his second home. But in that prison, there was a mean prison guard named Captain Vikilski. Vikilski liked to be very harsh with the inmates, even when they didn't do anything really wrong. Basically, he enjoyed hurting people. However, Bohemi didn't let Vikilski bother him. That's because Bohemi was considered a senior and reliable prisoner, especially when it came to fixing machines. Before he ended up in prison, Bohemi was really good with machines and could operate all sorts of them. So instead of doing simple jobs like cleaning, Bohemi got to work in the prison factory. Thanks to his machine skills, he became friends with the prison head, a guy named Radoev. One day, Radoev called Bohemi to his office and offered him a job making special valves for hydroponic systems. Radoev did this because every prison in Bulgaria needs to have a business to save money for the government. Radoev also told Bohemi that if he could make a lot of these valves, he might be allowed to leave prison early and see his son again. But to make a bunch of valves, Bohemi wanted to ask some other prisoners for help. One of them was Angelov, who was more than 2 meters tall and had a scary reputation as a cold-blooded killer. Despite his tough image, Angelov had a soft spot for animals, even the cockroaches in prison. Without hesitating, Angelov accepted Bohemi's invitation because Bohemi was his only friend in prison. The next day, Bohemi gathered his team in a car as they headed to the machine factory. His team included people who were skilled at fixing things like lathes, motorbikes, and other machines. But there was one prisoner, Igor, who was a bit hard to handle. In fact, Igor didn't follow orders from Vikilski, and Vikilski got angry and hurt Igor. When they got to the factory, Vikilski told Bohemi and his team to do the job that Radoev had given them. While they were working, Vikilski gave instructions to a new guy named Vladimir. Vikilski warned Vladimir not to get involved with the prisoners because they could be very dangerous and might harm him. He also told Vladimir to be careful around Igor, who was in prison for harming an old woman. During their break, Igor caused trouble again and almost fought with another prisoner. Instead of stopping them, Bohemi ended up being challenged to a fight by Igor. Thankfully, Vikilski separated them before things got worse. Shortly after that, Vladimir shared some candy to celebrate the birth of his first child. While the other prisoners only took one piece of candy, Igor grabbed all the candy for himself. After giving out candy, Vladimir got more instructions from Vikilski. This time, Vikilski showed him a pistol and a key. The pistol was for emergencies because Vikilski knew that sometimes they might need firearms to control the prisoners. As the day went on, they were almost done with their work. But then, Angelov stopped the machine he was using because he found a pigeon stuck in it. Angelov didn't want to continue working until they freed the bird. The problem was that the machine wasn't easy to take apart. On the other hand, Vikilski kept pushing Angelov to start the machine again, but Angelov refused. So, Vikilski told Vladimir to start it, but suddenly, Angelov grabbed Vladimir and strangled him with a chain. Angelov also threatened to harm Vladimir if Vikilski continued to force him to work. At that moment, Igor saw a chance to get back at Vikilski. He attacked Vikilski, beating him until he passed out, and then he tied him up with chains. When Vikilski woke up, he warned that security officers would come soon, and Igor would face a severe punishment. He also threatened that Bohemi and the other prisoners would get the death penalty, but not before they were tortured. This news made the other prisoners upset, and they started blaming Igor and Angelov for their impulsive actions. As their leader, Bohemi stepped in to calm everyone down and suggested two options: either kill Vikilski and Vladimir or make peace with them. The prisoners chose to make peace because if they killed the guards, they'd still be stuck in prison. However, Igor was still eager to harm them, while Angelov cared more about the dove's fate and was willing to harm Vladimir to save the bird. Nobody knew why, but Angelov seemed very serious about it. Then, Vikilski mocked Angelov, which making him mad. At that time, Angelov almost killed Vikilsky with his massive hands, but the other prisoners managed to hold him back just in time. However, things took a turn for the worse when two guards became suspicious after hearing Vikilsky's screams and seeing the factory door locked. One of the guards reported the situation to Radoev, and soon after, one of the prisoners attempted to negotiate with the warden outside the factory. Unfortunately, the guard accidentally fired his gun, killing the prisoner. Hearing the gunshot, Bohemi rushed outside and was shocked to find one of his friends dead. Shortly after, Radoev arrived at the scene, even though he was supposed to be on vacation. The government then sent troops led by Colonel Kozarev, a very tough soldier who wouldn't hesitate to harm anyone. Radoev didn't like Kozarev being there because he considered the prison his territory, not the army or police. But Kozarev couldn't just leave since he had orders from higher authorities. After arguing, they decided to contact the Ministry of Defense. There, Radoev asked for some time to talk to the prisoners because they were valuable assets working on machines. If that didn't work, then Kozarev could step in and handle things his way. The Ministry of Defense agreed to this plan. Meanwhile, inside the factory, Bohemi and the others were running out of solutions. They had gotten involved in this big problem all because of a bird, which had resulted in their friend's death. Bohemi suggested surrendering together to avoid more harm. However, Angelov threatened to hurt Vladimir if Bohemi surrendered before rescuing the dove. Bohemi eventually gave up on his plan because he didn't want anyone else to die. He then negotiated with Angelov to help him free the bird from the machine, but afterward, they'd have to surrender. When Igor didn't agree with Bohemi's proposal and attacked him, Angelov suddenly intervened and scared Igor into apologizing. Long story short, Angelov tried to open a machine's valve with just his hands and succeeded. Bohemi and other prisoners helped open another part of the machine, but they needed a special tool, which they didn't have. There, Vikilsky suggested taking the machine to a repair shop to save a bird trapped inside. Bohemi and the others had to find another way. Angelov then had a dream where bird lovers buried him alive, making him feel guilty. That's why he wanted to save his pigeons so much. As time passed, they still couldn't free the bird. Bohemi asked Vladimir for help, warning that if he refused, he'd face the same fate as Vikilsky. At that time, Vladimir had to agree. While the prisoners worked on the machine, Kozarev was studying files about Bohemi and the others to know their strengths and weaknesses. He also told Radoev that he'd have to eliminate the prisoners if any guards were harmed. Then Radoev asked Kozarev to wait, because he believed Bohemi wouldn't harm the warden. On the other hand, one of the prisoners was sharing a story with Vladimir. He talked about Angelov, who used to be a kind and thrifty person. But things changed when his family angered him deeply. Angelov reacted violently, harming his brothers and father with a machete in a gruesome way. Since that day, he became one of Bulgaria's most feared killers. Soon after, Radoev came to the factory and wanted to speak to Bohemi. Radoev tried to persuade him to surrender, promising not to punish him too severely. However, Vikilsky suddenly shouted that Bohemi and the other prisoners had planned everything to escape. Fortunately, Radoev didn't believe Vikilsky and trusted Bohemi, whom he had known in prison. Radoev gave them 1 hour to free the pigeon and offered parole to Bohemi if he released one of the prison guards. This upset the other prisoners because only Bohemi was given a chance at parole. At that time, Igor suspected Radoev of trying to take advantage of Bohemi, but Bohemi didn't want to make a big issue of it and untied Vikilsky, getting ready to release him. Vladimir would remain in custody as collateral. However, when Bohemi brought out Vikilsky, Kozarev opened fire on them. Thankfully, both Bohemi and Vikilsky survived. Then Radoev immediately confronted Kozarev for breaking their agreement. Kozarev's men then aimed their guns at Radoev, preventing him from further harming Kozarev. Soon after, Radoev's superior stepped in and took control of the situation. While Kozarev prepared his team, Bohemi and the other prisoners continued their efforts to save the pigeons. At this moment, all the prisoners began to understand Angelov's goal, which was to set the pigeons free, just like they wanted to be free from prison. Even Igor was touched and decided to help his friends. They started sharing their biggest desires, but they knew they had to act before Kozarev came in and put an end to their plans. While the other prisoners wanted to escape from prison, Angelov's only wish was to free the dove. At that time, Bohemy then asked Vikilsky for the key to the warehouse to find tools to open the machine. But Vikilsky tried to provoke Bohemy by saying that Kozarev and his special troops were on their way to wipe them out. Surprisingly, it was Kozarev who had framed and imprisoned Bohemy in the first place. Vikilsky suggested that they team up to fight against Kozarev. Radoev also promised to help Bohemy escape from prison. However, Bohemy didn't let Vikilsky's provocation get to him and found a tool to open the machine. He planned to use fire to open the engine valves. Then, while the other prisoners were getting their tools ready, Bohemy asked Angelov why he wanted to change and repent. Angelov replied that he wanted to feel human again because prison had made him feel like an animal. Bohemy was deeply moved by his words and started crying. Outside the factory, Kozarev is getting his troops ready to break in using explosives. Meanwhile, Vikilsky has decided to help the prisoners because he couldn't bear the pain he was feeling anymore. He also set fire to the machine's body and managed to open it without harming the pigeon. When Angelov was about to clean the bird's oil-stained wings, Vikilsky suddenly pulled out his gun and ordered all the prisoners to lie down on the floor. Hearing that, everyone obeyed, and Angelov calmly continued cleaning the bird's wings. But when Vikilsky tried to shoot the bird, Angelov lost control and strangled Vikilsky to death. Afterward, Angelov and the prisoners took care of his pigeons together. However, Kozarev and his troops arrived and forced the prisoners to lie down. Angelov, however, defied Kozarev's orders and chose to stand up and release his pigeons. At that time, Kozarev considered Angelov disobedient and ordered his troops to eliminate him right there. When Angelov died, Bohemy, Igor, and the other prisoners looked relieved and touched because Angelov had finally set the bird free. Moreover, Angelov had achieved his lifelong goal, which was to be free from prison. Kozarev, who had had enough, was about to finish off the prisoners, but Vladimir intervened with a gun and told Kozarev to spare Bohemy and the others. In the end, Vladimir testified in court that Bohemy and the others didn't deserve the death penalty, so they didn't receive additional punishment. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is sometimes it takes a big bird-loving guy with a killer reputation to teach us that freedom is worth fighting for, even if it means strangling a mean prison guard with a heart smaller than a pigeon's feather.